So I've been thinking a lot about the whole masterpiece status that I've given albums, and I don't know why I just started thinking about it, but yeah, I wanted to kind of take a look back at all those albums that I have given the masterpiece status to, and see if they still hold water, if they still deserve to be considered a masterpiece. And before we do that, I also wanted to kind of think back of any albums that I didn't give the masterpiece status to, and retroactively give them that status. And there are really, I believe, only about 3 of those albums that I gave a different rating to that with time and perspective, I would now essentially give the masterpiece status to. And the first was Return to Omadan by Mike Oldfield. I believe at the time I said that you should pick it up in physical format. I don't even know if I had the I Love It With My Whole Heart rating too. But yeah, 100% it is a masterpiece. The Return to Omadan, Mike Oldfield. I believe that's actually Mike Oldfield's last album. I don't think he's actually released anything since then. The other one is 5 Pieces for Orchestra by Tony Banks. Again, this was another one that I didn't give the masterpiece status to, but I think with time and me taking some time and really digesting it, yeah, 100% I would have given it the masterpiece status. I believe I just gave it the I Love It With My Whole Heart, but yeah, it deserves the full masterpiece status. And finally, one from last year that I didn't give the masterpiece status to was Etaman Anka by Dune. This was my number 1 album from 2021, and yeah, with time and appreciation, I would 100% give it the masterpiece status. So if you haven't heard these 3 albums by now, go ahead and seek them out. Each one is a masterpiece in their own rights. Yeah, so with those out of the way, let's dive into the albums that I have given the masterpiece status to. And if you can believe it, within my 8 years of doing this whole YouTube thing, I've only given the masterpiece status to 10 albums. That's like just over 1 album a year. I know that there were a few years where I gave more than 1 album the masterpiece to. There were other years where I don't think I gave the masterpiece status to any of them. But yeah, I figured I'm going to dive in and talk about each one and kind of process and see if it still deserves the masterpiece status. So I figure I'll start with one of the first ones that I gave the masterpiece status to, and that is Luciferian Towers by Godspeed You Black Emperor. Yeah, this album still is a masterpiece. You know, I revisited it, I listened to it, and every time I listen to it, I get emotional, especially at that end piece. Like, I start to melt when I listen to this album. You know, it's just overwhelming. It's my favorite Godspeed album, and I know not a lot of people enjoy this one as much as I do. I mean, I consider it their best piece. To my ears, it is still an absolute masterpiece. Absolutely still holds up. You're going to find a running theme on most of these, by the way. The next one comes in by Fido, Infernal. And I mean, how can you not give Infernal a masterpiece rating? Again, I re-listened to it. Even though it's a double album with a lot of music on it, it holds my attention throughout the entirety. It had the Herculean task of concluding The Great Leap and Doomsday Afternoon. That really wasn't really supposed to be a concluding album piece, but man, Fido stepped up to the plate and knocked it out of the park. Not only was it a continuation of 2 very, very different albums, he was able to link both of them together within this one album. You know, I'm not surprised that Fido hasn't put out an album since then. I think this has literally wrung out so much of his musical creative juices, and if he wants to go out with this album, all the power to him. I think that he definitely knocked it out of the park with this one. So yeah, absolutely still deserves the masterpiece status, and yeah. The next one is The Other Shore by Murder by Death, and this was the one that kind of spurred this whole thing, because I was talking about Spellbound, the album that they released earlier this month, and kind of like taking a look back, because this was, again, an early masterpiece on my list, and it still holds up. You know, I think this is one of the best albums from a indie style of music. You know, I feel like so many of these albums are so entrenched in the prog rock sphere that having any album outside of that, I think, is very well welcomed. So yeah, this one absolutely gets the masterpiece. The ending track on here still makes me extremely emotional and still gets me, right in the feels. So yeah, still absolutely a masterpiece. Another one that gets the masterpiece status, I forgot, was La La Land soundtrack. I'm still surprised that this soundtrack was as good as it was. As a movie musical, it still holds up. I know a lot of people don't like La La Land. They find it very cliche. They just didn't connect with it. But for me, it came at the right time with the right emphasis, and again, it got me right here. Every time I listen to it, I get moved. I think it's one of the best movie musicals we've got in a very, very long time. And yeah, I still think that it deserves the masterpiece status. I don't know if I'm quite as excited about it as I was when it first came out because of just where I am now and where I was then. But even though I'm still not as warm to it as I once was, I still think that this deserves the masterpiece status. Another one that I actually recently talked about in another video was Galasphere 347, their debut and only album. This was another one that I gave the masterpiece status to, and I completely forgot that I did, and I'm so glad that I revisited it because absolutely it deserves it. It's still fresh, it's still tight, it's still bumping. If you're looking for that very big symphonic prog sound on here, something that doesn't sound like anything else, man, give this one a spin. Like, this is that kind of lost gem progressive rock. Yep, still deserves the masterpiece status. Now, another one that I unofficially gave the masterpiece status to because I didn't necessarily rate it because I didn't think it deserved a rating was the art piece of Everything at the End of Time by The Caretaker. Yeah, I didn't rate this one because I didn't feel like it was apt to rate a piece of art. Unlike a lot of the other albums that I've talked about, I feel like this is predominantly art first and music second, diving into dementia and Alzheimer's disease through music. And, this thing is like over 6 hours in length. And I got to be perfectly honest with you, I listen to this album at least 2 or 3 times a year because, I don't know, like, even though it's so gripping and so soul crushing, it's almost like a warm hug for me. Like, it's almost like comfort food because I remember listening to this a lot during, the 2020 lockdown and getting so much solace from it, like so much like comfort in it. So now I almost attribute it to, even though things are bleak and even though things really, really suck, there is a light at the other end of it, and looking at it now when, the lockdowns are lifted and everything's starting to return to what it was like before. I can't say return to normal because it was never normal, but at least returning to what it was like before the lockdowns. I return to this a lot when I'm having a very, very hard day, and I get a lot out of it. So yeah, this is absolutely like the star child of a masterpiece. If you don't like, I always want to say it, like, don't go into listening to this expecting music, go into this expecting art. And that's the best way to approach this. So yeah, it's absolutely still a masterpiece. And I think it really will stand the test of time, even when our memories give out. All right, another one that I want to talk about that's kind of in the same vein is Anna von Hauswolf with All Thoughts Fly. This one was a very hasty masterpiece for me, and I revisit it quite often, and yeah, it's still a banger. It still is. Like, Anna on the organ is just so unbelievably beautiful. Like, it transcends words. It transcends music in that sense. I love how big and how bombastic it is. Like, she has gone through in the past albums utilizing her beautifully haunted voice and vocal range, but this one is purely instrumental, and it really does solidify a lot of the ideas that she was playing around with on a lot of her past works. This is one that I still come back to and look upon quite fondly. It still deserves the whole masterpiece status, and I'll stand by it. All right, next up is Through Shaded Woods by Lunatic Soul. Still a banger. Still a masterpiece. I gave this one a spin, and yeah, it still has, like, what I love about this is both how somber and intimate it is, while also being so big and grand. You know, like there's not a whole lot of electric guitars on here. There's not a whole lot of electric music, period, out of this. A lot of it is made through acoustic sounds, but man, is it ever big. It feels like this big, wooded, woodsy, foresty ritual. In a sense, you know, it's so big, it's so rhythmic, it's so hypnotic that I cannot help but get swept away. I love what Maria's Duda is doing on this. Brilliant, brilliant work, and absolutely still deserves to be considered a masterpiece. I think this is one of the best Duda projects, including Riverside. Like, I outside of maybe ADHD, I don't think he's gotten any better. So, yeah, if you haven't heard Through Shaded Woods by now, please go ahead and do so. It is brilliant. All right, coming down to last two, if you can believe it. The second last one was the Hexahedron, the live at Hernie Odston Kunstner, by Ulver. Which is interesting. Ulver is such a hit and miss band for me. Some of their albums are friggin' amazing, like The Assassination of Julius Caesar. Still bops, you know, it still really hits me. But other ones like, what was it, The Evil Flowers, The Doomed Flowers from a couple years ago, did nothing for me. It wasn't until I listened to their live album that they recorded just before the lockdown and that they released, I believe, last year or the year before. Man, this one still moves me. You know, I put it on, and it was in that same kind of vein that All Thoughts Fly did. Really still love this album. You know, really beautiful, really, like, gorgeous. And considering that this was all done in one go because it's a live album, just goes to show how brilliant and beautiful these musicians really, really are. Yeah, absolutely still deserves the masterpiece status in my mind. If you love very like ambient experimental noise rock, you're going to love this stuff. Yeah, go check it out. All right, and now the most recent album was Hushton Grim by Mastodon, if you can believe it. Yeah, last year I gave Mastodon the only masterpiece rating, even though I would have, amended that by also giving it to Dune. But yeah, Hushton Grim really knocked it out of the park. I love the concept. I love the music. Each track, even though it's a double disc, like double album, each track hits hard, you know, and playing around this concept was brilliant and beautiful. I just could not stop listening to it. Even last year and into this year. I regularly give this one a spin throughout the year, and each time it rewards me. That last track just gets me right through the heart. So, yeah, still deserves the masterpiece status. I think that this is their strongest work, and that includes Crack the Sky. Like, I would put this one above Crack the Sky. Yeah, that's it. Those are the 10 albums. Spoilers at this point. Yeah, all of them hold up. I know I probably could have saved myself about 15 minutes by just saying, yep, all the albums still hold up, but I wanted to at least give each one credence and at least talk about, like, does it still hold up? Does it still bang? And yeah, each one does. And I'm pretty proud of that list of the 10, now 13 albums that I would consider a masterpiece. Because yeah, they all are like top of the tier, top of the crop. So that's what I've got. What did you guys think about these albums? Which ones would you consider to be masterpieces that I didn't include here? Now, keep in mind, I started this back in 2014, I believe it was. So I've only really been reviewing music since then. I mean, at least here on YouTube, I used to review over on the Prog Rock Archives. Which ones were your favorites of the albums that I had mentioned? Let me know all about that by commenting down below. And if you like this one, maybe give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm and getting this video out to more people, trying to grow my audience a little bit. If you haven't already subscribed, you know, subscribe and ring that bell and whatever to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Yeah, that's what I've got. That's what I've got. So I hope you guys like this one, and I hope you guys enjoy the videos coming out soon. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.